The goal is to not just pay off debt, the goal is to put yourself in a position where you can generate income. I agree it's possible. The question is, should it be done? Okay, I went from $1,085 to about $2,900. That's almost a $2,000 increase in my cash flow. In this case, she was offered a $150,000 home equity line of credit. And I want to, yeah, it was 9.4. $150,000 first home equity line of credit at 9.4% was that interest rate. And again, when I look at these two numbers, and again, I'm just comparing, I did not do the math at this stage. I was just simply looking dollar for dollar. $150,000 home equity line of credit, and the original thought was to pay off this $136,000 home equity loan. So these two dollar amounts, so I get it. Once this is gone, this is all I have left. But what is the benefit? What do I gain in doing so? Okay, I pick up $1,200. Sounds like a fair amount. But when I add $1,200 to her current cash flow of $1,000, is $2,200 enough, $2,200 a month enough to be able to address this $150K? Could be, but I needed to dig more into the details. I needed to dig more into the income to understand whether or not this does or doesn't make sense. So I just shared my thoughts as it relates to this $150,000. I understand why it needs to be used, but my concern was the projected payments. That $1,500 to $2,400 a month payment is what was my concern. And then because there was not a lot of understanding around the HE loan, I had a lot of questions around the product that she currently had. And I wanted to make sure that this new product that we were looking at, that she was looking at getting, that we fully understood what the cost of entry and how it can be leveraged, how it can be used, like what are the details around this line of credit. So I just had a lot more questions than I had, hey, yeah, take that 150 and go do this. So it was just a lot more questions that I had about the product. And I think what that did for her was it gave her some, I'll call it opportunity to dig more into the details. And so that's kind of how we left our first meeting. When we were looking at her numbers, so income, as I mentioned, she has decent income, but let's understand the breakdown of that income. So she's got $46.65, and that is her normal W-2 job. But she also has this rental, and she's also renting a room. So there's additional income related. This was my issue, or this was my concern. While this is decent income, $62.65 a month, I think is decent. My concern was I don't think this is very stable. Meaning, right now, the rental is being rented. Right now, the room is occupied. But the individual in that room that's currently occupying it at $550 a month, what's the likelihood of that person being there in perpetuity? So if I'm picking up this $150,000 line of credit, and that $150,000 line of credit is maxed out, yeah, I've got great income today that can address that, but what does it look like if for whatever reason this changes? So that was one of my challenges. The other was in kind of identifying or breaking down the expenses and the debts. Again, when you subtract the expenses and debts from this income, cash flow, pretty decent. And we were looking at this $150,000 as what would it look like if that $150K HELOC was the debt tool? So, okay, what I wanted to do was just put this into practice. This is not where we ended up, but I wanted to understand, okay, what would it look like to be able to break this down? So let's kind of put the original offer into practice. And again, I'll zoom in when I need to. So if we put the original offer into practice, what does that look like? So we're talking about a $150,000 line of credit at 9.4% interest. Again, she's got a HE loan of about $136,000 plus this line of credit at about 9.4%. And then we got cash flow of $185,000. So this is the baseline of where we're starting. Again, this is the baseline of where we started based off what the offer was, based off how much the home is worth and the bills that's kind of hanging out there to date and the cash flow. If we were to just simply take the expenses and the debts, add those two together and subtract that from the cash flow, this is where we're sitting today. So about $1,000 a month in cash flow. Okay, awesome. Well, in understanding some of those debts and breaking those debts down, let's go by. Normally, I don't dig into this part of the sheet, but I wanted to kind of just go into a little bit more detail here, just so that we can understand what we're dealing with. Okay, we've got this HELOC, and that HELOC is sitting at somewhere around $1,270 a month at about 3.5% interest. I didn't think the interest rate was so bad. Again, I get the product is bad, but I was appreciative of the 3.5% interest. Like, where else are you going to get a loan for 3.5%? Okay. So the opportunity is there's this home equity line of credit sitting at about 150,000. We haven't started that yet. Oh, this interest rate is wrong. That's actually 9.4. But at any rate, so we've got this home equity line of credit, and then we've got some other debts. The items in red, so if you would just look at the color, the items in red are what I identified as being the high interest debt. And so if we're going to use this $150,000 line of credit, then the items in red is what I was focused on paying off. And this is me and my math. This is no one else's math but mine. Again, and I know it's kind of difficult to see, but just focus on the color. These were the high interest, and to kind of read into what those high interest debts are, we're talking 30%, 33.5%, 32%, 30%, 27.5%, 22%. So if we add all of these up, plus paying off the HELOC, so again, all of these, plus the HELOC, add those up, that gave me about 150,000. So if I was to pay those off, if I was just to simply pay off those items, I had a few issues with that. One was the size of the debt that we're paying off, this $150,000, being able to pay off that $150,000 timely. That was one of my concerns. The cash flow. While the cash flow is consistent today, is the cash flow consistent tomorrow? So the cash flow isn't great, meaning it's not spectacular. And in addition, how stable is it? And then time, the amount of time it would take for the cash flow to be able to pay off this $150,000 was my other concern. And HELOC, the HELOC payment, $1,200 a month, compared to just the interest only payoff of the line of credit. Because the largest item that I'm eliminating here is the HELOC. So that $1,200 payment is far less than the interest only payment of the HELOC. And again, I don't know that anyone else would have identified that other than me, because I was struggling with the fact that I'm going to replace a debt with a debt. That's really all I'm doing here. I'm replacing a debt with a debt. And I didn't really benefit from the payoff of that debt, because the cost of the debt, interest only, equals the full payment of the item that I'm paying off. And I struggled with that. So, but if we were to do it, if we were to simply address the items in red and subtract those items in red from this line of credit, what's going to happen? Well, the monthly payments of 135, 150, 50, 30, 35, 25, 42, 126, and 127 or 1270 for that home equity line of credit. If we add up all of those debts now paid off, my cash flow does increase. Like, there's a win here. So that 6265 minus the new payoff, the new total after all of those items are paid, there should be an increase in this line of credit. I'm sorry, there should be an increase in this cash flow. What is that increase? Okay, so let's kind of dig into it. Well, if we were to address the line of credit as normal, use this $150,000 to pay off the HELOC and those high interest credit cards, as I mentioned, there is an improvement in cash flow. Meaning the new debts and the debts and expenses being paid is about 3,317. Subtract that from the cash flow. Okay, I went from 1,085 to about 2,900. That's almost a $2,000 increase in my cash flow. Sounds amazing, right? Okay, so let's put that to work. What would it look like if I was to take this almost $3,000 a month in cash flow and put it to work into this HELOC? How long would it take to pay off this line of credit? Sweetheart, if you jump over to the calculator, I will show. So in essence, what would happen if we were to pay off this, or again, focus all of our attention, all of our efforts on paying down this line of credit? We got a $150,000 line of credit. We paid off the home equity loan, which is awesome, and paid off a majority of our high interest debt, which is awesome. How long would it take for that $150,000 to be paid off? Well, this is saying right around 60 months. I understand it's small, I'll zoom in, but it's right around 60 months is what this was saying. So it would take approximately 60 months to be able to pay off this line of credit using that cash flow of almost $3,000 a month. Is that okay? So again, it takes 60 months. 60 months is what, 5 years? It's a 10-year draw on the line of credit. So I would say there's nothing wrong in taking this approach. I think my issue with this approach is a little bit unique. My issue isn't whether or not it's possible. I agree it's possible. The question is, should it be done? Meaning, if you look at my cash flow, look at my income coming in. I got 4665 in income coming in plus rental income. That rental income is not stable. It's there today. It may not be there tomorrow. With all of the nervousness around gaining a line of credit and not making the same mistakes that I made with this home equity loan, is there an opportunity to approach this the same way without taking on such a large burden? And that's kind of where we landed. We landed at, rather than taking on a $150,000 line of credit at a 9.4% interest rate, and again, and you have decent cash flow in paying off some of this debt, what would it look like if you did not take on such a burden? Is there an opportunity to do something different? My issue was here. The size of the monthly cash flow compared to the size of the line of credit. This was my issue. So my goal was, can I improve this process somewhere? Can I adjust or eliminate or reduce the amount of line of credit and it be a bit more comparable to the amount of cash flow that the client has? And in doing so, we had to navigate some other pieces. And that is maybe the opportunity here as it relates to where you're getting your line of credit from, maybe there's an opportunity to go somewhere else. Meaning this $150,000 line of credit was actually with the same bank that she currently banks with. So what I learned was, didn't really step outside of the comfort zone to identify whether or not there were some other opportunities elsewhere. And this is where laying out what those questions look like, how you should ask, who you should ask, and even if you run into the first individual who may not understand fully what it is you're wanting, understanding who to go to next. So maybe bypassing the primary bank and kind of focusing attention on, are there other banks out there that can offer the execution needed, offer the product required in order to be able to accomplish the goal? And Ava's goal to eventually consolidate fewer banks. This was this issue here is, hey, I have a bank that I normally bank with. My income comes into the checking account of that bank. What you're asking me is to go identify another institution where I'll then be moving my money from, transferring from my current checking account into the line of credit at another bank. So now I'm bringing in even more, I'll call it more variability into this process. That was a legitimate concern, but we had to talk through it because, again, what's the goal? The goal is not just pay off debt. The goal is to put yourself in a position where you can generate income. So I would say pay less attention to where the line of credit is coming from and pay more attention to, is this line of credit a vehicle that can fully function as a debt tool? Does it have its own checking account? Does it have its own debit card? Can I write checks from that line of credit? Does it provide me overdraft protection? What are the pieces associated with this line of credit that will allow me to truly accomplish the goal, not just the convenience of, hey, it's linked or it's with the same bank that I currently bank with? If that makes sense. And so we ended up revising the offer, meaning she ended up and there's a lot going on here and I'll kind of dig into some of that detail, but we ended up revising the offer, meaning instead of a $150,000 line of credit, she ended up getting offered an $80,000 line of credit at 8%. So 150,000 at 9.4 ended up being offered an 80,000 at 80,000 line of credit at 8%. And again, same criteria, same $1,000 in cash flow. And in this case, it looked a little bit different overall, meaning this $80,000 line of credit along with this HE loan, obviously $80,000 will not pay off this HE loan. And I say that's okay. Because if we follow the strategy, we can still address this HE loan over time if we choose to. And I go back to if we choose to. And my concerns here were less of concern and more about wins. And it was what could be paid off using this line of credit. And again, focus on the color. Being able to address all of this red, meaning all of this high interest debt. Notice this HE loan is still sitting up top. I am not touching this HE loan first time around, but it's what would it look like if we were to just simply address this high interest debt, and what would be achieved in doing so? Well, there's a few things. One, cash flow increased by about 1682, so there's still an increase in cash flow. There's an opportunity to introduce a family bank. That was one of the original goals. Her daughter's going through some challenges, got some high interest debt that she's trying to get rid of as well. Is there an opportunity to assist in being more of a family bank in this process while also paying off debt? And ultimately what ended up happening, again, the answer to the test, she ended up paying off about $56,000 in debt in about 20 months. I think it was, that's actually 30 months. About 30 months total is what this debt ended up being paid off in time for. And what does that cash flow increase look like? So the 6265, when we pay off the high interest debt, add that to the normal expenses, there is an increase in income. That increase in income, because if you can see it, I'm showing this as a negative number, meaning there is an increase in income here because she became a family bank. She was able to lend a certain dollar amount to her daughter, and there's a cost associated with lending that dollar amount out. And we'll dig into more of those details. But the moral of the story is she ended up with a pretty decent cash flow, and I'd say comparable to what she had before, about 2767. I think before it was like 2,900. So it's about a $200 difference in cash flow, but a less, the size of the dollar amount that she ended up having was a lot less. And again, digging into some of those details, the idea was to pay off this high interest debt, and we're talking again 14%, 22%, 27.5%, all the way up to about 33.5% is the interest debt that was being paid off using this process, and putting herself in a position to where she could take about $30,000 out of this line of credit and offer it to her daughter as a debt payoff as well. And this was an interesting discussion also, because there was a fair amount of dialogue around, one, how much should I provide and what should I charge? And this came straight out of a simple interest calculator at calculator.net. This wasn't, my thought process was not to make this too complicated. A little bit of backstory on this subject, meaning becoming a family bank for a daughter. Her daughter was already prepared to take a $30,000 loan from her company's 401k. So this was already an action that was going to be taken. Well, that $30,000 loan that she was going to take from her 401k was going to end up somewhere around $800 a month. So here's an opportunity to save her daughter some money, and also put herself in a position to where she has more, I'll call it defined income, stable income to assist in the payoff of this line of credit. So in doing so, this $30,000 loan at charging herself 12%, and again, if you were to put it in a simple interest calculator, $30,000 at 12%, it works out to about $675 a month. And if you multiply $675 a month over the next 60 months, it's a 5-year payback period. Over 60 months, it ends up being somewhere around 39 grand, if I'm not mistaken. So there's about 9,000 in interest that's being paid through this process. So again, here's an opportunity to, in total, instead of 150,000, pay off about $56,000 in debt. So if you subtract the 30,000 that she's providing to her daughter, it's about 26,151 is what this total amount of debt being paid off equates to, about 26,000. So again, cash flow about 2767, paying off about $56,000 of debt. So what does that look like from a velocity banking perspective?